still recall the day I set out on my own. Not much at all, but dreams to make it all gone. Then came the time, stand there for all that I knew. Lives in the night, taking the pain that I lived through. You at my side, finding the strength to move ahead, crossing the line with help and the love from a friend, holding the light that many thought was dead. I've ridden the wind with the sun in my face. I rode in the wind in the cold and rain. No, I wouldn't change my life by one day. I'll ride in the wind till I'm home once again. Moving forward, using all my breath. Making love to you was never second best. I saw the world crashing all around your face, never really knowing it was always mesh and lace. I'll stop the world and melt with you. You've seen the difference and it's getting better all the time. There's nothing you and I won't do. I'll stop the world and melt with you. Dream of better lives, the kind which never hate. Trapped in a state of imaginary grace. I made a pilgrimage to save this human race. Never come getting better all the time. There's nothing you and I won't do. I'll stop the world and melt with you. 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 I'll stop the world and melt with you.
Okay, I'm back, everybody. I'm back in the bunker. I'm in the resistance bunker. North America is slowly being laid to waste by the global tyranny that is trying to reshape humanity in their own sort of twisted image. But there are still a few of us out here who are resisting the tyranny, and hopefully we can retain some semblance of true democracy and freedom for everybody. So welcome everybody to my bunker. I'm Jen Smith, and I'm not the leader of the resistance, but I would say that I'm at least a lieutenant. How about that? Okay, so let me just see here. It looks like I'm a little too zoomed out. I got to zoom in a bit. Skynet seems to be letting me broadcast still. Wow, that's quite a zoom. Let me just move that up. And let's see, I think that's good. Is that good? Anyone can see me? Seem a little lacking color here. Hang on. Let me just get that fixed too. Okay, a little color. A little color. There we go. Welcome, everybody. General Smith. Yeah, I could be a general. See, the thing is that if you believe something, you have to be willing to sort of stand behind that, right? So if I am suggesting that this whole sort of virus pandemic thing has been blown out of proportion, which I am, right? I have to be willing to sort of put my body behind that in terms of, going out in public without face mask, without rubber gloves, standing close to people, shaking people's hands, whatever. Now, you don't want to be stupid, because a lot of people on the other side will say, oh, well, if you're so certain that this is all, hyperbole or something, then you should go into the hospital without a mask and work with sick patients. Well, that's just like a stupid reply. There's people in hospitals who are sick all the time with all kinds of different conditions, right? Wearing a N95 mask in a hospital is sensible, right? Because there are really sick people in there, and typically the sickest people will go into the hospital. Out in the general public, it's a whole different story. And I've been sort of walking around without a face mask, without rubber gloves. Somebody wants to shake my hand, I'll still shake their hand. I won't go any further than that. But anyway, excuse me, I have to clear my throat. That means I've got COVID and I don't have long to live. Not really. Okay, so what do we have on the agenda tonight? Well, I've put together a rather interesting, evolving video project. Okay, it's a work in progress, and what you're going to see tonight is like a beta version of it. Okay, so we'll call this beta version 0.5 or something, right? Moving towards release version 1. But I think it's at a juncture right now where I can sort of put it out there for everybody to take a look at and maybe provide their input, decide, what works and what doesn't work. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put something on the screen, and we'll talk about this because there was some discussion about this today. There it is. Can you see that? Anybody out there who wants to stay in touch with me, you should probably go to transanity.ca, use the contact form there, and send me your email address, and I will put you on my email list. How about that? Hi, Kathy. Kathy's already on my email list. Kathy is one of my email managers, actually. Hi, Dorian. It's my good friend Dorian, who's being challenged. He's really being challenged in these difficult times. There we go. Yes. Okay, we'll talk about this photo in a second here. But I am out of alignment. Let me just get my camera lined up here. I'm not a professional, people. I'm not a professional. I'm doing my best. See what we can do here. There we go. There we are. That's good. Everything in order here. I've actually gone on cam before, having forgotten important things like my earrings. Earrings, got earrings? Yep, earring, check. Lipstick, check. Necklaces, check. Spike bracelet, check. Oh, I know. Dorian says, no mask. How dare you disobey the virus police? What was that old There's No Split End song? Nobody takes me seriously anyway. Nobody takes me seriously anyway. At least that's what Angelo and Noah of the UBC Free Speech Club say, and uses a justification for having not assisted me in being able to speak freely. Talk about this momentarily, a bit of a battle with the UBC free speech gang, not to be confused with the UBC Students of Freedom of Expression, who I don't have any problem with, but the UBC Free Speech Club, I think, is just a right-wing, pro-establishment, pseudo-free speech organization that really just promotes people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and all of these pro-establishment voices. They throw in a couple of token left-leaning people from time to time, like the nudist, what's his name? Corky. I think his name's Corky. He's a nudist. They go, see, we put this lefty nudist Corky on, and that means that we're really balanced, right? And we're really interested in freedom of speech. As if this nudist is a big threat to the establishment, right? We'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, no mask for me. I will not be buying a mask. I will not be buying rubber gloves. I'll not be buying any of that stuff. We can sort of break down some of what's going on here, because some people are maintaining that it's a hoax and that there is no virus. Some people are saying that it's a biological or biologically manufactured bioweapon. I'm sort of in the middle. So there's so many viruses and flus and stuff out there all the time that it's not hard. Like, why would you hoax a virus when there's all kinds of viruses all the time that you can latch an agenda, if that's what you've got, onto? You can latch yourself onto something real. And there are a lot of nasty viruses that come along. I've told people in previous editions of the agenda that I had a vicious flu when I was in my 20s, young and healthy, and 20 pounds thinner back in those days. And this virus nearly took me out. I mean, I was vomiting and sick and the coughing eventually turned into pneumonia, and like a bad case of pneumonia too. There were a couple of incidents where I actually was struggling to breathe, like I couldn't get my lungs to function. But I managed to survive that. So the thing is that there's nasty viruses that go around all the time. And despite the fact that that virus was there at that time, affected not only me, but just about everybody I knew, and it went like ravaged my workplace at that time. And I worked in a fairly big company at that time, had like 100 employees, and like a huge percentage of the employees came down with the virus. But the difference is they didn't stop the world, right? That was my introduction song, right? I Melt With You, Stop the World. They wrote it out, okay? And old people with compromised immune systems and stuff, they were on notice, right? Don't maybe stay home as much as possible. Keep yourself away from other people until this virus has passed. People who are sick, you shouldn't be going out. Or if you must go out, try to stay as far away from people as possible. And, take measures to control your cough, for instance, like cough syrup, these types of things. We won't get into the cough syrup scandal that I revealed before. But the point is that nobody needs to hoax a virus, right? You just have to wait for the perfect virus and latch your agenda to that if you have an agenda. And we'll discuss whether or not there's an agenda out there. One of the things that I'll say and should say and talk about is the fact that people need to understand my mindset. So a lot of people have gotten viciously angry at me, but I should deal with this photo first, because that actually was just a time killer. But this photo is interesting because it's been released widely across the media, talking about this mass grave that they've had to manufacture for the because of the virus, and they're burying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bodies, they say. I did a little math here, and I don't think that that's hundreds. I believe it's under 100 that they're burying there, which actually is not uncommon for that particular mass grave site. I believe it's called Hart Island, just off of New York City, and it's been used for a very long time to bury people and what they used to call paupers' graves, right? Mozart allegedly was buried in a pauper's grave. Because there's so many people who don't have family or next to kin, and they're street people, and in a city like New York, millions of people, especially in the whole sort of New York area, millions of people. So there's a lot of people dying all the time, right? So there are mass graves for these people who don't have anybody to claim their bodies, right? And this has been going on for a long time. What I find interesting about this photo is a couple things. Okay, so here's this big mass grave. Let me just get my pointer going here. There's this big mass grave, and I don't know if you can see it here, but they're filling in this grave with shovels. And the guys working with the dirt are wearing white. That seems a little odd. Everybody's got the face masks and stuff, but they're wearing white. This guy here, it's the guy with the orange headdress or whatever. He's even got one boot off, and I don't know what he's doing, taking a rock out of his boot or something. But the interesting thing to me here is, okay, so first of all, they're using a shovel to bury this mass grave. Well, that's absolutely absurd. Now, if you go to the history of this place, let me just see if I can bring that up here. Okay, so let's first of all realize that, stop this window, and I'm going to share a different window. Hang on. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is a photo of the normal operations at Hart Island there. And you can see everybody sort of sensibly is wearing dark colors. Now, this is for a smaller burial. And it's only a little creepy that the person being buried is a J. Smith, like Jen Smith, J. Smith. A little creepy. Okay, I'm a little creeped out by that. It's a little spooky. I'm a little spooked. I believe in omens and stuff. I'm not gonna focus on that. But anyway, so you can see here, it's everybody's sort of sensibly dressed. There's only like one shovel there, and I guess that's for some perimeter work. But mass graves are not dug with shovels. That's just not the way it's done. Let's go on to the next one here. Okay, this is sort of standard operating procedure at this Hart Island. Now you can see here they've got two front loaders. Okay, that's the equipment that they use for mass graves. The pit itself was obviously dug by these front loaders. And one of the little known facts is that this particular mass grave site has been in operation for 150 years. They've been mass burying people on this site for 150 years. Over recent decades, most of the unloading of coffins and stuff has been done, as you can see here, in the striped suits by prison inmates. Right, and they get paid to do that, and they're shipped out, and they have to wear these striped suits because, you know, when prisoners are out doing work, if they try to run away, this makes them easily identifiable. So they have to wear these colors. So there they are unloading, but you don't see shovels, right? That's because they've got this machinery to bury it, right? So that's you know, it's an interesting thing there. And nobody's sort of silly enough to be wearing all white. But let's go back to the original photo here. There it is. Okay, so again, there's like sort of a big difference between what's going on there. Why are they like why would they bury all of these bodies using shovels? This, like, I'm not saying that it is, okay? This is just an analysis, right? A critical, skeptical analysis of what's going on out in the media. First of all, as I mentioned on Facebook the other day, I can't go down to the White Rock Beach without being intercepted by authorities, right? But apparently, and this is a Facebook thing too. If I post anything that's considered moderately insensitive during this pandemic, they will say it's against community standards, and they will remove the post, or they'll suspend me or whatever. But in this case, apparently you can go out and you can take photographs of a mass burial, totally sort of disrespectful to the dead, and publish that widely, and you'll get no flack whatsoever from Facebook. That's considered perfectly okay. So that's one of the first things there, is that, okay, who took this photo? How did they find the site? How did they know they were going to be there burying them? And who let them take this photo? And why did nobody go after them for taking this photo? Second of all the white suits. This looks almost like a staged photo. The white suits gives you the impression that these are, you know, hazmat bioprofessionals, right? And apparently these people have been turned into what they used to call in. I used to do work on construction sites when I was young, and I was referred to as a bull worker because I did all the grunt work, right? I carried boards from one location to another. That was the type of thing that I did. So they've turned these lab people apparently into bull workers, and instead of doing the usual filling of the grave with the front loaders, which is quick and easy and efficient, they've got everybody here with shovels. Makes for a good photo, but, you know, anyway, that was just something that I found curious. Yeah, why would you wear a white suit to do something like this? I mean, there's all kinds of potentially valid explanations for that. Oh, hi, Adam. Yeah, so I've already discussed that, Adam. He's a builder. They use front loaders. And I've got pictures of this, that they standard, like usually, typically, at that site use front loaders, right? And nobody is wearing all white, right? But like I say, there's plausible deniability there. I'm willing to accept that. But what I do is I sort of critically analyze things, because I think that's an important service. And I've talked about this before. And people need to understand, particularly some of the people who get angry at me recently because I'm questioning what's going on with this whole pandemic thing. It's, people who followed me for a long time, like Jennifer Bulick and Priya Reddy, and some of these people who have followed me are angry at me because I'm questioning what's going on. But as I said last week, it doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong. Okay, what I am doing is a valuable service, and whatever is being put out there by the government and the establishment and the mainstream media, somebody should be analyzing it from a critical perspective and saying, okay, let's take a look at this. Is there anything in this that doesn't smell right, that doesn't seem right? Is anything out of place? This is a service, okay? So you can agree with me or disagree with me. It doesn't matter. The inappropriate thing to do, and what I've been getting, is all of these people out there who come in and who throwing names at me, calling me a science denier and a virus sympathizer, and all of this sort of nutty stuff. And I got into a fight with the UBC Free Speech Club gang there yesterday, I guess it was. I've had sort of a bone to pick with them for quite some time. They would have you believe, because of this argument that I got in to with them, that because I got a little bit nasty with the two sort of main organizers there, which is Angelo and Noah, I kind of went after both of them and suggested that they're pseudo free speech champions. And we had sort of a heated exchange, and they said, well, this is exactly why we haven't done anything to support you, is because of your attitude. It's like, I never gave you that attitude before right now, before you sort of crossed the line. Because what was happening is that the people running the UBC Free Speech Club were sort of trolling social media and immediately attacking and shaming and ridiculing anybody who questioned what's going on with the pandemic. And so I watched them doing this a bit, and I got pissed off, like I tend to do. And I went after them. I said, what kind of, crazy free speech advocates are you, right? In your position as alleged advocates of freedom of speech, you should be encouraging free speech, not encouraging mocking and shaming and ridiculing and insulting people who question things. Right? That would be the proper role for a true free speech champion. Let's get into some of my beliefs and what I'm doing. I'll discuss here in a moment. So they, like the UBC Free Speech gang, didn't do really anything to assist me at any time in terms of when I was sort of being assaulted by the establishment and deplatformed and being attacked by almost every major element of the establishment, particularly in and around my tour of Vancouver Island and the UBC talk, right, that resulted in the Pride Parade. Ejecting UBC as an official participant. At that time, it was being discussed all across Canada, right? And there was a lot of people out there talking about the fact that it was justifiable to silence me. Now, at that time, the UBC Free Speech Club did nothing to assist me. They didn't offer to, provide a platform for me or anything like that. The only thing that happened was Angelo, because he was requested to be interviewed on CKNW, I think it was, he said a couple of sentences of support of my right to free speech, and he figures that this is showing what a brave champion of freedom of speech he was. But at that time, because this was a national story that everybody was looking at, he would have looked like a complete fraud if he had not at least said something to sort of support me when I was being, everybody wanted to silence me. But beyond that, he really did nothing. And I sort of tolerated them and never said anything sort of negative about them. Eventually, I started getting a little annoyed because they were talking about all these different people that they were talking about promoting and hosting, because apparently they're under assault or something, like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. There are these horribly assaulted people, just can't possibly hold a talk without the help of the UBC Free Speech Club, right? Of course, that's utter rubbish, right? Neither one of them need any help, but they were discussing all these different, mainly right-wing figures, and I have sort of documented all of the speakers that they've been promoting as, that they're helping in terms of freedom of speech, and it's almost always sort of right-wing, pro-establishment, pro-corporate people, right? Somebody like me who's anti-establishment, right? Who's out there exposing corporate corruption and pointing out failures in the system. Well, they don't want to seem to help me at all. And I got frustrated with them in time. And I talked to Noah and I said, I don't really think you guys are interested in free speech at all. I think all you're interested in is making sure sort of radical pro-establishment right-wing voices get as much exposure as possible. I think that's what you're up to, and you don't really want to promote me. And then Noah gave me this story about how, oh, well, we need to be able to make ends meet and, break even or make a profit. And now we're kind of getting at it, right? Because with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, they rake in the cash, right? And any of these big name people, they rake in the cash. But people like me, who are local to BC and struggling and can't get the big audiences, partially because I'm so heavily censored, right? Well, they don't seem to want to help me. And I said, well, why wouldn't you make some sort of effort to sort of show how much you support freedom of speech and work with me in terms of getting back to UBC or getting to SFU, who canceled me from having a speech there. And they said, well, the first thing that one of them said was that I don't bring anything unique to the transgender debate, right? Nothing that apparently Megan Murphy or Ken Zucker or some of these other voices out there in terms of transgender opposing transgender agenda. I didn't bring anything unique, so it was just a waste of time to try to provide me with a platform. Now, none of those parties, right? None of the other parties look at the medical pharmaceutical complex and the conflicts of interest and corruption there. Nobody does that. It's one of my beasts with Megan Murphy is she's a weakling in this regard, okay? She doesn't go after them. She might sort of deal with them ever so briefly when somebody brings up the subject, but for the most part, she stays clear of questioning the medical pharmaceutical complex. I step into that 100% and go after it aggressively. Also, none of these other parties are really going after the brainwashing of our children in school. I go after that extensively and talk about the dangers that poses to vulnerable children and stuff. I bring a lot of unique things to the table. So that sort of first response was, prima facie absurd, right? So that's sort of, we started getting into some heated exchanges at that point. And so the bottom line became the next thing that they were talking about. Wow, we need to be able to balance the books and stuff. And it's like, okay, I tell you what, if you guys open the door for me and provide, a space for me and sponsor me, I'll take care of the costs, right? I'll pay for the venue, right? I'll pay for the insurance and security fees and stuff like that. And they still wouldn't, right? They still sort of refused to address that and sort of fell into this thing that, again, that, I'm not a valid voice or something, right? Something like that. And that's when I really started getting pissed off at these guys and decided that the UBC Free Speech Club was not a free speech organization. Noah, one of the guys there, I believe is just a propaganda agent for the Israeli Defense Force. And the reason I say that is that anybody who sort of questions what Israel is doing in Palestine is a subject of his venom. He will go after them, rip them up every single time it happens, right? And I began to notice this trend with him. Like I've said that in terms of what is happening in Israel, I have sort of a kind of a neutral outlook in terms of I understand the threat and the difficulties and fears that the people of Israel must feel when they are surrounded by sort of hostile forces. I understand that. That makes sense to me. But I also don't think what they've been doing in terms of bulldozing, areas of land and seizing all this land and all these military assaults on the Palestinian people is justified, right? So I'm sort of somewhere in the middle there. But Noah is aggressively rabid. And I have some research that I did on the fact that the IDF in Israel is actually paying people and recruiting volunteers who will go onto social media and they'll go out into public platforms and stuff and consistently and repeatedly promote Israeli state policy and positions. And that's what Noah does on a regular basis. So I said to him, I said, so do you receive paychecks from the IDF? Or are you a volunteer? Because it seems to me like that seems to be your primary interest. And the other interest would be the financial. And I talked about Angelo too, and this fact that money is so important to them. But money wasn't the driving thing there. But because I got into the heated exchange, like I say, they sort of retroactively said, your nasty attitude is exactly why we wouldn't do anything to help you. First of all, you can't apply our words recently to your behavior 6 months ago, right? It's an invalid thing to do. I was perfectly polite and reasonable with them at that time, right? I just sort of lost it recently when they were out there assaulting anybody who questioned the establishment right now, right? So that's not valid. Furthermore, and I've said this before, whether we're talking about the UBC Free Speech Club or whether we're talking about the BC Civil Liberties Association or whether we're talking about the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, when you are dealing with free speech issues and your whole sort of reason for existing is to defend freedom of speech, you're going to deal with a lot of cantankerous individuals who don't or are not inclined to shut up when people tell them to shut up. And they might be aggressive figures. So as a free speech advocate, you have to expect that you're going to encounter people like this, right? So saying, oh, well, we don't really like you, so that's why we're not doing anything. It's like, that's not how free speech works, guys, right? So if I was running the UBC Free Speech Club, whether or not I like somebody would be irrelevant. But anyway, as I say, this gets into sort of understanding my sort of viewpoint. So people want to sort of demonize me and call me a conspiracy kook and all this stuff because I'm questioning what's going on. But it's all invalid. Okay, so first of all, people have to understand that I am university educated. Okay, I went to what was the top university or top ranked university in Canada at that time, which was Simon Fraser University. I guess they've slipped a bit in the decades since I was there, but that time it was ranked the #1 university in Canada. So I went there and I learned all about sort of scholarly and academic sourcing. I know all about primary sources and secondary sources and record sources and research sources, all of these types of things I'm well aware of. Not only am I well aware of them, I proved in university, I would say decisively, that I'm able to process and present information in a scholarly and academic way that is convincing and, as they say, can stand the peer review process. Because not only was I able to do that on a consistent basis while questioning the establishment, I graduated near the very top of my class. Okay, so I've proven that I'm very good at doing that. But people will sort of look at me and they'll say, okay, so if you went to university and you did so well, why do you engage all of these crazy theories, right? Like there's something going on with the pandemic thing. Well, the reason for that is that I'm a free thinker. Okay, so two of my favorite authors, Robert Anton Wilson and Philip K. Dick, were all about the vast diversity of human belief and opinions and theories. And I believe that this is, what makes us such a creative and dynamic species, sometimes to our own detriment, it's true. But when we come up with all these innovations and stuff, this is because of people's ability to think in ways outside of the box and outside of the mainstream. And what we see now is we've got the establishment people and people like the UBC Free Speech Club and some of these other people are criticizing me, saying, no, you have to listen to the experts. You have to trust the experts. And whatever the experts say, you have to listen to them. And to me, it's like, no, that is anti-scientific, because good science is about being able to think outside the box and outside of the generally accepted standards, particularly when a lot of what's being done now is based on, highly dubious testing and death certificates and stuff like that. I'm not going to unpack all of that now, but thinking outside the box is a good thing. And whatever sort of ideas that people want to put out there, I'm not somebody who's going to say shut it down and say, no, that's just too crazy. I'm okay. I want to hear it. You got a wild, crazy theory. I want to hear it. Right? I'll listen to it. If I think it's absurd, I'll say, well, I think that's kind of absurd. But I'm not going to discourage it. And for a free speech organization, be discouraging it is highly suspicious. And this gets into one of my things about what I think is going on right now. And one of the things I think is got to do with reinstilling trust in the establishment, because they knew they had a serious problem with that. What I want to do here is, on that note, I'm going to replay something from, like, I think is an idea of what is going on. Or one of the things. There's always a whole bunch of things that are going on at any given time. If I can find it here. There it is. Make sure I share the audio. Okay, now I want you to pay attention here to what our official pop scientist is saying here. And remember what I've said about the fact that one of the biggest problems that the establishment has been dealing with for some time is a loss of trust in not only public officials and corporate CEOs and stuff, but also the medical research establishment and scientists. So just listen to what he has to say here. This is right after, or like in the very, like within a week or so of when this sort of whole COVID thing went sort of viral in the media.
Please welcome Neil deGrasse Tyson. Okay, Neil, spoiler alert, you're a scientist.
Indeed.
And legally, I am required to ask you your thoughts about the coronavirus.
Oh.
And I understand you're not a virologist, you're not an immunologist, you're not an epidemiologist, but I suspect...
I'm an astrophysicist, Jim.
I suspect you have an opinion.
A point of view, I would say.
Okay.
I would say. So I'm broadly scientifically literate, but what I will say of this virus, I think we're in the middle of a massive experiment worldwide. And that
where
is...
are the guinea pigs?
Maybe. The experiment is, will people listen to scientists? In this case, referring to medical professionals.
Medical professionals.
In this particular case.
Say Anthony Fauci over at Allergy and Infectious Disease.
For example,
Yep.
And are you washing your hands? And are you taking these precautions? These are warnings offered by scientists. And
for our own good.
For our own good. It'd be interesting if we all paid attention to what scientists say. Mm-hmm. Maybe the coronavirus will just blow on by with a minimum of cases. And then we kicked its ass for obeying the recommendations of scientists on how to minimize your chances of getting it. That would be, it's an interesting experiment we're in the middle of.
Okay, interesting there at the end. He talks about obeying the recommendations of scientists. And he talks about this whole thing about people listening to scientists, right? And that if we just listen to scientists and put our trust in scientists, that they're going to see us through to the truth and what's good for humanity. And what he is not sort of addressing there, and it's an egregious omission, and he must know this, is that the scientific, particularly the pharmaceutical medical research establishment, who are so involved in this whole pandemic thing, right? They have proven over and over and over again throughout the course of their modern history that they are completely untrustworthy. So it'd be nice if we actually had scientists out there who were only interested in the public well-being. They had no other interests or motives or whatever. It would be great if we had, a collection of saintly scientists working for the good of humanity and nothing but the good of humanity. But unfortunately, that's not what we have. Okay, I pointed out before that DSM, for instance, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that's used to diagnose mental health conditions and help people with classifying people so they can be prescribed drugs usually. The people who put that together, the task forces that were responsible for writing that manual, are riddled with conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry, right? The vast majority of them have conflicts of interest. There's something like 20,000 studies exposed every year. And keep in mind, we're just talking about the ones that were identified and exposed as being corrupt, right? As being deliberately falsified, 20,000 per year. Criminology estimates that only 10% of crimes are actually detected. So you can times that by 10 and come up with, maybe 200,000 fraudulent studies every year. Okay. So they're telling me, and they're telling the populace at large, that we should just blindly trust this establishment. But again, this gets back into this agenda that I was talking about. And that part of the agenda, I think, is in reforming the technocracy. Okay, the technocracy that they're trying to set up, this quasi rule or dictatorship by experts and government officials, right? And corporate leads, like this ultimate sort of fascist thing that they're arranging. So I think part of it, and they talk about the media incidentally, by the way, too, how people have lost trust in the mainstream media. And it was a serious problem because these are the official voices. And I would say they are under the control of the establishment, which is, I think, reasonably easy to credibly demonstrate, right? So last year, before this all broke out, our Prime Minister here, Justin Trudeau, gave a curious speech to the it was a gathering of the top media people in Canada. And I'm going to bring that up here if I can find it. Okay, now just listen to what he's saying here.
A free press is the foundation of democracy. Full stop. I know you believe that, and I know that's why you do the work you do. You have a pretty powerful responsibility, and as much as you guys can give me a hard time, I wouldn't have it any other way. So please, keep asking the tough questions and keep us engaged in the essential debates that are shaping our society. But we also need to be vigilant here at home. We live in a time when people are losing trust in their institutions, and the news is no exception. We're witnessing dangerous trends, not just online, but in our communities as well. It is the job of every single person in this room, members of the press, politicians, staff, to uphold and renew that trust.
So it is the duty of the media to reestablish trust. The job of the media apparently is to make people trust the establishment more. Well, that's unusual. I didn't think that that was the media's job. I thought the media's job was to report things as openly and critically as they could. But apparently Trudeau, to a round of applause at the end, if I went on further, you would find, has said that it is the job of the media to reinstill trust in these institutions that he has recognized and the establishment has recognized for some time has lost the trust and the faith of the community. So the media has a job to reinstill that trust, apparently. And right again, so again with the Tyson guy there, he was talking about how people need to trust scientists, right? And we've heard this over and over again, that people need to trust the scientists, forgetting completely who these scientists are and their history and their track record, right? And let's look at something else that Trudeau said very recently in the wake. So that was last year, like right before this whole thing, that they needed to work to reinstill trust in the establishment, particularly experts who would be central to what I'm calling a technocracy, which seems to be what they're trying to set up here. That's a theory, okay? So let me just bring another thing up for you here. There we go. I found it. Okay, so this is very recently, and I want you to pay attention to the part where they zoom in on Trudeau's face, right? To make like they're accentuating one particular fact. So just watch what Trudeau had to say here.
Hello, everyone. I want to share a critically important message with all of you, and I'm asking that you share this message too. COVID-19 is taking its toll on people all around the world and in every part of our country. We've all had to adjust our habits, and every single one of us needs to do our part. For our own health, for our parents and grandparents, and for our nurses, doctors, and healthcare professionals who are working tirelessly to keep us safe. Everyone needs to listen to the experts if we're going to slow the spread of this virus. That means washing your hands often and for at least 20 seconds. That means staying home. That means staying at least 2 meters apart and not gathering in groups. And to everyone who still isn't following this advice, now is the time to do so before it's too late. Now is not the time to be hanging out with your friends at the park or hosting dinner parties. If we do the right things now, we can make a difference and get through this together.
Okay, so you'll note there's a couple of things there. So they zoom in on the part where everyone needs to listen to the experts, right? Fact is, everyone listening to the experts and obeying the experts, right? Which is important, critically important if you're going to set up a technocracy, right? It's based on basically shutting people up who aren't experts, right? It's a very elitist thing. So they zoomed in on him when he said that particular line. So that was planned, right? And the other thing that you see them doing quite a bit here is they keep referring to healthcare professionals like nurses and doctors and stuff like that, and how your duty is to support them who support you, right? That is an emotional plea or ploy. Okay, that is a psychological manipulation tool because everybody supports nurses and doctors. That goes without saying. Okay, but they aren't the policymakers. They're also not scientists. Okay, science was part of their education in becoming healthcare professionals, but they're not scientists per se. They get their information from the medical pharmaceutical research complex that I've talked about as being so fundamentally corrupt. And their information that they tell you is as reliable as that information that is given to them. My whole shtick for the last 2 or 3 years has been pointing out that these sources of information are highly unreliable to the point of being dangerous to the health and well-being of everybody, right? But they want to sort of make this about your duty to the healthcare professionals and the doctors, right? But that's a psychological ploy. So people need to be aware of that. So what I'm going to do, let's just see if I got any other setup stuff here. Just sort of, I guess I should probably finish up with the UBC Free Speech Club thing and note that I don't think they're a valid free speech institution at all. And their leaders, Noah and Angelo, as far as I'm concerned, they're not true champions of free speech. They say because I am now got problems with them, that this is why they didn't platform me in the past, and I regard that as nonsense. And I really don't have anything positive to say about that organization anymore. Paul, formerly of Freedom Free for All, has once said about me that I'm somebody who likes to fight. I'm not sure that that is a correct characterization of me. I think possibly because of the psychological dynamics of my key formative years psychologically, and the fact that I was an outsider, I was a reject, I was bullied viciously and just rejected by society over and over again, and constantly under assault from bullies and stuff when I was young, that I developed a kind of a psychology of being constantly at war with everybody. And I carried that into my adult years. Even though I was a foster kid who went through 6 different homes, I met my biological mother. I sort of did some research and found her, located her as an adult. And I got all the sort of the details on how I ended up in foster care. And what I found when I located my biological mother and my interactions with her and understanding what happened in terms of me going into foster care, this enabled me to understand myself better by understanding her, because my biological mother was a fiery woman. Okay, she was a woman who didn't back down. Okay, if somebody was out of line, it was a big, tall, tough man, you know, almost twice as tall as her or something, you know, a big mountain of a man. She wouldn't back down. If somebody was out of line, she would get in their face and she would not back down. That was sort of her nature. And when I went into foster care, her sort of tendency to sort of stand firm for what is true and correct was ultimately what resulted in me going into foster care, because I had sort of behavioral problems when I was very young that were well, very sort of strange behavioral problems. And the state sort of intervened at one point and took me out of the custody of my parents. And they went to my mother and father, who is my father's very sort of mellow guy. He didn't really get involved, but they said to her that you must follow these guidelines and do this, that, and the next thing in order to get your child back. And the recommendations and the expectations that they put upon her were completely outrageous, and she had really not even the financial ability to follow those guidelines, right? And so when they said you have to do this, that, and the next thing, she basically said to the establishment, no, I'm not going to do that. It's unreasonable. That this is my son. Give me my son back, and don't try to tell me what I have to do. And the court basically said, listen, unless you follow these guidelines, you're never going to get your son back at all. And she stood firm and she said, no, you're wrong. I want my son back. And she stood firm, and that's what happened. So the state, basically exercising its power, said, okay, fine, you're not going to do what we say. You're never going to see your child again. And so even when the well-being of her own child was at stake, she would not back down, right? And so that's kind of the blood that flows through my veins, the sort of fiery Irish blood. And so it is sort of ingrained in me that when I see something that's wrong, or I think that somebody's sort of egregiously out of line, that I want to sort of go after that aggressively and fight it. It's in my nature. Okay, it's not that I like fighting, it's just that something that's in me. So I would sort of ask people to sort of try to understand that about me. And like I say, when I'm being critical, I'm performing a public service. What I want to do now, is I want to give you my sneak peek, my beta version of this video project that I am working on. And for this, you are going to need to, once again, put on your space helmets. Okay, hang on a sec here. Let's cue this up. Okay, so you're going to need to put on your space helmets because we're going to step outside the capsule. Things are about to get a little bit strange. Okay, my big sort of abstract, what I would call quasi-artistic exploration of some of the stranger stuff that I've been noting is going on. Just a couple of seconds of mood setting. Okay, hang on. Going to get you the video here, and this is going to take a bit again. And what you'll find in this video is that there's two distinct segments to this video. The first is sort of looking at sort of some of the strangest, sort of most awe-inspiring aspects of what has been going on. And the second half is sort of offering an explanation in some ways about what's going on, by sort of comparing what is being said globally and some of the overlaps in what is being said globally. So if you got your space helmets on, I'm going to bring that up right now. Yeah, I've always got my space helmet on because because I am an unusual thinker. I like to step outside that box. And if anybody tells me to get in line, I'm inclined to raise my middle finger. Don't tell me to get in line. I'll do what I want to do. And that's the end of the story. But here we go. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to mute my mic and I'm going to let this roll.
Nope.
The threat a novel coronavirus poses to human health is severe.
Nope.
Named for the crown-like spikes on their surface, there are currently 7 types of coronavirus that can infect humans. WHO has said that human-to-human transmission has now occurred within families in China and among those caring for infected patients.
Nope.
Tonight, Italy staggering as the virus rages. 475 more deaths in 24 hours.
Agony in Europe tonight as Italy's death toll passes 10,000. A day after another morbid milestone, 919 dead on Friday, the most in one day in any country. Global cases rising above 650,000, with more than 30,000 dead. In nearby Spain, authorities today reported 832 more deaths, the country's highest daily count yet, bringing the total to 5,690.
There is a light at the end of this tunnel.
Starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. What you're hearing about potential light at the end of the tunnel.
There is a light at the end of this tunnel.
Frankly, this is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. Our 9/11 moment.
Why you left me alone? Please, come back. Don't leave me.
Don't cry. You are now more powerful than ever.
What is going on?
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
We're enduring a great national trial. I want to assure the American people that we're doing everything we can each day to confront and ultimately defeat this horrible, invisible enemy. We're at war, and we're fighting an invisible enemy.
China has gone all out to fight the disease. The people stand united to wage a people's war against an invisible enemy.
This is going to be the hardest and the saddest week of most Americans' lives, quite frankly. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country, and I want America to understand that.
I've got to be clear, we've all got to be clear, this is the worst public health crisis for a generation, and it's going to spread further. And I must level with you, level with the British public. More families, many more families, are going to lose loved ones before their time.
Right now, the future can seem even more uncertain than normal. Our healthcare systems across the country are coping for the time being. But we're at a fork in the road between the best and the worst possible outcomes. The best possible outcome is no easy path for any of us. The initial peak, the top of the curve, may be in late spring with the end of the first wave in the summer. There will likely be smaller outbreaks for a number of months after that. This will be the new normal until a vaccine is developed.
This afternoon, I also signed an executive order investing, and very, very strongly investing, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Homeland Security with the full authorities available under the Defense Production Act to respond to the outbreak of the terrible virus, the invisible enemy, as we say.
This crisis is so difficult because the enemy is invisible. And the answer is to remove the cloak of invisibility and to identify the virus and to be able to know which of us is carrying it or who has actually had it and now got over it.
We are in a situation of war, a health war. We're not fighting against any army or another nation, but the enemy is there. It's invisible and it's progressing.
We are moving through an uncertain future. Countries simply have to have in place a system to detect, isolate, contact trace, and quarantine. That takes a very sophisticated surveillance system, and what we need to do now is evolve to much more precise, targeted, directed measures. And at the moment, in most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
We are engaged in the most significant industrial mobilization since World War II. We have a wartime president fighting an invisible enemy, and we have the full force of government coupled with the full power of private enterprise bearing down on this problem for the American people, sir.
The provisions before you could never have been imagined as necessary even a few months ago. Who could have predicted that we would be challenged to legislate in the face of a global pandemic that is sweeping the world and killing tens of thousands of people? Yesterday, Ireland lost 10 people. It was by far the darkest day of this emergency so far for us. But in truth, we know that we need to brace ourselves for a lot worse to come. This invisible enemy is just beginning its spread through our country and through our people. We're being confronted with a once-in-a-century crisis.
So together, and with the rest of the world, we face this unprecedented challenge. A once-in-a-100-year event. Life is changing in Australia for every Australian, and life is going to continue to change. For many, young and old, 2020 will be the toughest year of our lives.
Well, I wanted them to understand this is a different kind of enemy. It's an insidious, invisible enemy, and people are going to die. People are going to die.
Every day it's different criteria. Every day this horrible, invisible enemy changes a course. It changes course.
We are at war today. The war that we are fighting now is an invisible enemy that you will not see with the naked eye. Take cover. Stay home. Do not congregate, because the enemy could come from any one of us.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And the greatest unknown is that which you cannot see, that which is invisible.
The invisible enemy, as we say.
An insidious, invisible enemy.
The enemy is invisible.
It's an invisible enemy.
An invisible enemy.
Fighting an invisible enemy.
This invisible enemy is just beginning.
This horrible, invisible enemy.
It is the understandable fear of the unknown.
It's important that that fear be used in a productive way.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavor.
Over 150 countries all over the world.
We have before us the opportunity to forge, for ourselves and for future generations, a new world order.
This whole invisible enemy has taken over the world.
It's important that that fear be used in a productive way.
And the problem with this one is the contagion. It's so contagious. Nobody's ever seen anything like that, where it's so contagious. You can be feet away and just talking to somebody and catch it.
I want America to understand, this week, it's going to get bad.
I must level with you, level with the British public. More families, many more families, are going to lose loved ones before their time.
We are unfortunately going to continue to lose people across this country in the coming weeks.
People are going to die. People are going to die.
And there'll be a lot of death, unfortunately.
Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them.
And some of those people are going to die. They're going to die.
Between 4,000 and 44,000 deaths.
Young and medium-aged, plenty of those people dying too.
We are entering or moving through an uncertain future.
Take cover. The enemy could come from any one of us.
Okay, there we go. There's my little space trip for you all. Like I say, this is an evolving project for me. I still have all kinds of material that I want to put into this and grow it and expand it, provide some narrative and stuff. But again, I think people sort of need to return to the fact that I am two things. I'm kind of a living dichotomy in the sense that I am schooled classically and have been to education. I know all the documentary standards, but I believe that whether you're talking about science or whether you're talking about politics, you need to be able to move outside the box and think in unique and creative ways. So the powerful are not going to tell us what they are up to. So I believe it is my job and the job of all people who value freedom and who value open discourse and free speech to step outside the box and try to come up with unique theories to try to understand and explain what is going on in the world. And that is what I am trying to do now. You know, for my former supporters who have been demonizing me because I'm questioning what is going on, I hope that this little sort of beta preview of the video that I'm working on will give you an idea of why I am questioning what is going on and why you shouldn't be demonizing me. Okay, because 1 month ago, so many of these people who have abandoned me now agreed with me that the government was full of liars and untrustworthy, that the medical pharmaceutical research establishment was full of liars and untrustworthy, that the media was full of liars and was untrustworthy. You all sort of agreed with me 1 month ago on this fact. Now, because of fear, that fear that needs to be used in a productive way, they say, at the highest levels, right? Because of fear, you have flopped and done a 180-degree turn, and suddenly you are trusting all of these powers that 1 month ago you distrusted, and then you point your fingers at me and say that I now apparently am a science denier and a conspiracy kook. Okay? First of all, conspiracies are standard operating procedure in society at large, at the highest level. No question. Just even the most cursory analysis of the history of not only the Central Intelligence Agency, but all of the major intelligence agencies around the world. Just the most cursory analysis of their histories will tell you that almost everything these agencies do involves some sort of conspiracy, frequently conspiracies against their own public, but commonly having to do with manipulating people's minds, right? And I believe, and I noticed this when I was in university, like 20 years ago now, that at that time it had become apparent to me, because this was my chosen field of focus. So I deliberately decided to focus my studies on the history, the evolution, and the application of propaganda and mass psychological manipulation strategies by what we call the elite elements of the establishment. And there is a vast and diverse history there. So I focused myself as much as possible trying to understand the mechanisms of mass mind manipulation. Right. And what I concluded at that time, analyzing the documentary record, was that, and again, this is just a theory, but it appeared to me almost as if the science of mass mind manipulation had gone underground and probably now falls under national security protections, because it has been long recognized that the greatest threat in a free society to the establishment is not China, is not the Soviet Union. It is you and me. Okay, people talk about how totalitarian societies like the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were so much, relied so heavily on propaganda. Well, propaganda in those societies was not as very important, quite frankly, because they had the gun and the truncheon to enforce the rules, and that was the use of fear to get people in line. If you weren't in line, somebody would crack you over the head with a truncheon or drag you off to a gulag, right? But propaganda and mass mind manipulation is far more important in societies that put on a mask of being democratic and free. And I believe that is what we have now, is we have a mask of democracy, but that we are living in an increasingly totalitarian, technocratic, fascist state. And I use fascist, the word fascist advisedly, because fascist sort of represents this merger between government, corporate power, and the technocrats, right? And whatever country you look to around the globe, everybody, everywhere is singing the praises of the merger of all of these powers, right? And then people talk about it being a communist conspiracy. It's not a communist conspiracy. It's what George Orwell warned of just before his death. Okay, he warned everybody that what he predicted for the future was that fascism would move out of being a national cause and would go global. And instead of a fascist state, they would look to create a fascist world. And that is what we are seeing happening right now. Speaking of Orwell, Orwell had a warning just before he died. Let me just bring that up for you. If I can find it here. There we go. I want everybody to listen very carefully to what Orwell says here.
But always there will be the intoxication of power. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
Don't let it happen. It depends on you and me. And so for all of those people out there who are criticizing me and insulting me and demonizing me because I question the establishment, that is my duty. That is my job. Somebody has to do it. If you want to march in lockstep with these liars and deceivers, you go right ahead. But don't you come to me now and tell me that I, number one, who is, basically needs to get in line. Okay, I don't care who it is, whether it is the transgender activists or whether it's people who used to follow me. If you tell me to get a line and not question the establishment, I'm going to flip you the bird every time. It is the duty of us. No one else is going to do it. The powerful are not going to do it. Your government is not going to do it. Corporate executives are not going to do it. These corrupt medical pharmaceutical researchers are not going to protect and defend our freedoms and our democracy. That is up to you and me. And Orwell recognized this. And I want everybody to be very clear that this merger of public and private power and these technocrats is fascism. Okay, they are using money right now to bribe people, not because they want a communist state, but because they are trying to control what is going on out there. So that sort of is my message for today. Now, let me just see. I had some other stuff here that I wanted to cover. But before I go on to that, has anybody got any sort of questions here? Let me just look in the chat here.